Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang.
And I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Tonight, battered by a spring blizzard in the prairies.
Hey, look out!
In near whiteout conditions, a near miss moment for our CBC News crew.
Are you guys okay?
We're fine, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
The storm's not over yet. Plus, the worries all that snow could turn into floods.
Also tonight, rising interest rates, long-term gain with some short-term pain.
I think we're going to have the worst of both worlds in Canada.
The calculation to cool red-hot inflation and the Canadians on the brink.
I live basically paycheck to paycheck.
A day-long manhunt in New York comes to a dramatic end.
Frank, why'd you shoot all those people?
What we're learning about the suspect now charged with terrorism. And the victim still coping after the chaos on the subway.
Plus, 78 years after D-Day, Canadians fight on Juno Beach once more.
This is going to kill the Juno Beach Center.
This time to keep a condo away. This is The National. Well, after a particularly tough, snowy winter on the Canadian prairies, tonight people there are dealing with yet another punishing round of winter-like weather. And let's remember, it's supposed to be spring.
It is. A storm that forecasters say could be the worst in decades has landed, and it is packing a punch from southeastern Saskatchewan to northwestern Ontario. So this is what it looked like in Brandon, Manitoba today, with gusts up to 70 kilometers an hour and snow blowing sideways. Roads in southern Manitoba were closed, classes canceled, and people are being warned there is more to come. Cameron McIntosh is out tracking the storm in Winnipeg tonight. So Cameron, Manitobans are used to snowstorms, obviously, but the forecasts for this one were really severe. What's it been like there?
Well, so far not so bad. There's been a bit of a lull in the storm here, and so far it's mostly been manageable, but there have been some problems and some close calls.
With the first snow come the first plows, visibility dropping by the minute, shutting down Winnipeg's South Perimeter Highway. But not everyone pays attention to warnings. That's a sheriff's officer chasing down a truck, warning it to turn back. Shortly after, another truck loses its way in the whiteout.
Hey, look out!
Just missing our camera, that truck sliding out of control into that traffic light.
Are you guys okay?
We're fine, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, we're fine, we're fine.
Okay.
By the time I saw it, it was like too late, but I hit the brakes and I just skidded all over the place.
An example of the danger that has authorities warning people to just stay in, causing schools to shut, flights to be preemptively canceled, and highways to close. To put this in perspective, at 6 o'clock this morning, this was all green. Now it's a blanket of white and the snow just keeps coming. Manageable so far, but it's what still may come that has many people worried. In Brandon, Gordon Wallman delivers groceries.
I'm worried about the wind and the drifts.
In Morden, a convoy of plows and a fire truck is getting healthcare workers to the hospital.
We're very, very grateful for the emergency response committee for helping us with this.
The cows aren't really behaving like we thought they would. I think the storm's confusing them.
On this Saskatchewan ranch, spring snow disrupting calving season.
They just can't keep up to what the moisture is in this storm. So we have really wet calves, and they are very much like struggling moment by moment.
Back in Winnipeg, Louise Fontaine may be alone in embracing the notion she'll be doing more of this.
I love this weather, so actually this is sort of relaxing and calming for me.
Now, that's not the case for everyone. Across parts of southern Manitoba today, there have been some limited power outages. There are fears there could be more. And tonight, more than 20 highways in southern Manitoba are also shut down. 3 weeks into spring, a lot of people were hoping just to have winter behind them by now. The forecast, Adrienne, tomorrow is for heavier snow.
Yikes. Well, listen, very glad everybody there is okay. Cam McIntosh in Winnipeg. Thanks, Cam. To give you a sense of just how big the storm system is, this is what it looks like on the weather radar. Spinning north from the U.S., it's hitting southeastern Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba, and parts of northwestern Ontario. So let's bring in CBC meteorologist John Souter in Winnipeg. So John, that storm isn't over yet.
It's not over yet. Despite this little lull we're having here late in the day, it's actually quite comfortable here in Winnipeg, but west of here in Brandon, winds are gusting to almost 90 kilometers per hour, and the visibility in blowing and drifting snow is down to just 200 meters, that is. Now, all of this is going to, as the system moves away, wrap back down across into the Red River Valley tonight. We've had about 15 centimeters so far. I think our totals by this time tomorrow would be more like 35 to 40 centimeters, Adrienne.
So one of the big concerns, I gather, is what happens after the storm when the temperatures are expected to rise?
Well, by this time next week, we're going to be well above zero. The normal high is 10. We won't be quite that warm, but we're watching what's happening in North Dakota, where lots of snow, lots of rain also fell out of this same system. All of that, once that snow melts, drains into the Red River and starts to flow to the north, up through Manitoba and all the way to Lake Winnipeg. So we are looking forward to a slow melt. Flood forecasters say rivers here are already starting to recede, and they should recede more before all of that snow to the south of us and all of this snow in southern Manitoba melts and drains into the rivers and causes likely some overland flooding, but hopefully nothing too serious.
No kidding. CBC meteorologist John Souter in Winnipeg. Thanks, John.
You bet.
Borrowing is getting more expensive in Canada. Today, another milestone for that. And it's coming as the cost of practically everything else is also soaring. The rate hike is part of a plan to try to rein in inflation eventually, but there will be some pain along the way. So here are the basics. The Bank of Canada raised its benchmark interest rate by 0.5% today, putting it at 1%. This is the biggest single hike it has made since the year 2000, more than 20 years ago, and it'll be far from the last. As Jacqueline Hansen shows us, it all means that for many Canadians, things are going to get worse before they get better.
Canadians' finances are getting squeezed by high inflation and rising interest rates.
It's hard to basically afford the essentials I need, which makes it really hard to stay financially stable.
Everything's gone up. I'm much more careful in what I buy now.
The Bank of Canada's half-point hike will send variable rate mortgages higher, and the cost of fixed-rate mortgages have already climbed to upwards of 4%.
This is a big shock to the market.
This Toronto-based realtor says she's seeing fewer buyers and more desperate sellers.
The market got punched once in March, and now this is kind of like a double punch.
At 1%, the overnight lending rate is below pre-pandemic levels and far from historic highs, while inflation is at a 30-year high of nearly 6% as everyday costs soar.
Something needs to be done so that we're not paying such ridiculous prices for things.
Higher rates should start to bring inflation down.
Rate hikes are good and they are bad. They are bad in that it's going to cost you more to borrow money, but they are good in that they are the action that a central bank can take to try and control inflation.
The hope is as borrowing gets more expensive, domestic spending and demand will start to ease. But some of the major factors causing inflation are out of the central bank's hands. The war in Ukraine is driving oil prices higher, and supply chain challenges are pushing up the costs of goods. So change won't happen overnight.
That's not going to do much for inflation for Canadians this month or next month or the one after that. It is going to lower growth. I think we're going to have the worst of both worlds in Canada for the rest of this year.
A painful prospect for some.
All of this is very disconcerting.
On top of what we're paying right now, adding more into that is actually a lot more of a struggle rather than actually helping us.
Even with this hike, the Bank of Canada now believes inflation won't return to its target of 2% for 2 years, and it warns of more interest rate increases to come. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, you heard a little bit from Bruce Sellery there, a personal finance expert, CEO of Credit Canada. He will be back with us on this program a little bit later to answer your questions about what the Bank of Canada's move means for you.
Now to New York, where after more than a 24-hour manhunt, the suspect in yesterday's subway station attack has been arrested. Paul Hunter has more on what we're learning about him and the odd way in which he was captured.
30 hours after the rampage underground, an arrest. Milwaukee's Frank James, suspect in the bloody attack that rattled New Yorkers, with 10 people shot in a burst of rush hour madness.
My fellow New Yorkers,
We got him. New York's mayor and others on what's played out since.
He has been apprehended. He will be arraigned in federal court in Brooklyn, and if convicted, he will face a sentence of up to life imprisonment.
Police have now directly linked James with a gun found after the shooting, along with other evidence found at or near the scene. Security video shows a man believed to be James entering the subway system 2 hours before the shooting. But it was a hotline tip that he was at a McDonald's in Manhattan that led to his capture. And there's reporting now that it was James himself who called in the tip. Police found him on a nearby sidewalk.
Yo, this is the guy. Like, I can't believe that in my eyes, bro.
This man spotted James and shouted.
I see the police walking from over there. I thought the police, this is the guy. He did that problem in Brooklyn. This guy, catch him, guys, catch him. And he catch him. Thank God we catch him. Thank you very much.
I don't want to go to no prison. James has posted a number of videos on social media ranting at times about race, mental health, and violence.
We need to see more mass shootings. Yeah, we need to see more. There has to be more mass shootings.
Meanwhile, some of those shot continue their recovery. This man was sitting right next to the shooter, hit in the leg.
I still feel the pain. They gave me a bunch of pain meds, but it's still there. I can still feel it. I can still see the hole.
Frank, why'd you shoot all those people?
James has a long list of prior run-ins with police. He did not resist when they moved in on him.
Are you guilty?
Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Well, the man accused of killing 2 complete strangers in Toronto last week made his first court appearance today. Richard Edwin is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. And as Thomas Daigle explains, for some, the case is raising concern about how easy it can be to stockpile weapons in this country legally.
Friends and fellow college students gathered to say goodbye to Kartik Vasudev, gunned down last week with no provocation or warning.
It was heartbreaking, that I can assure you.
With grief comes concern about how the accused, Richard Edwin, was able to amass what police describe as an arsenal. Handguns, rifles, and ammunition, all found in his downstairs apartment and all obtained legally.
I question why anybody living in a big city would need to own a gun or have a gun in the city.
With a license, Canadian adults can buy a wide range of firearms or even shop online for a $700 pistol or a $4,000 short-barrel carbine.
The vast majority of gun owners that collect firearms, they are never used in crimes.
But advocates point, for instance, to the deadly Quebec City mosque shooting. The attacker had acquired 6 guns, all legally.
The number of guns you're able to accumulate, the amount of ammunition you can accumulate, which has no limit, the fact that you can buy accessories without license, these are all concerns.
Ken Price's daughter Samantha was wounded in the mass shooting on Toronto's Danforth Avenue in 2018. 2 years later, the federal government announced a ban on assault-style firearms, but recently it extended an amnesty period, allowing owners of guns like the AR-15 to keep them until at least next year.
Is there more to do? Absolutely. But this is an issue we are definitely focused on.
On average, the number of handguns in Canada only keeps growing, with nearly 1 million restricted firearms in legal circulation. Unusually, Kartik Vasudev and Elijah Mahupath were both killed last week at random. The type of weapon used was anything but unusual. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
A manhunt is underway in Manitoba for a man suspected of killing his family in Portage-la-Prairie, west of Winnipeg. RCMP are looking for Travis McLeod. He was last seen yesterday on foot in downtown Winnipeg. Investigators say he is considered to be dangerous and should not be approached. McLeod's wife and 2 children were found dead following a house fire on Sunday. Police arrested the 50-year-old but released him on conditions he stay in Portage-la-Prairie.
We know more tonight about how another manhunt ended. The search for the suspect in the deadly Nova Scotia mass shooting that left 22 people dead. The details were released by the inquiry examining the rampage, and we warn you, they are graphic. Kayla Hounsell takes us through what happened.
Shots away, pump number 6, Enfield Big Stop.
It is the moment police finally corner the gunman, 11:25 on Sunday morning.
At this point, Gabriel Wortman has killed 22 people disguised as an RCMP officer. Then 2 officers pull into a gas station, and by chance, he's there too. Within seconds, Constable Craig Hubley recognizes the gunman at the pump right beside him.
He saw the perpetrator raise a firearm, and it was at that time that Constable Hubley discharged his firearm.
But look at this. Just 10 minutes before, new surveillance video showing other officers in a very close encounter at a different gas station. At this point, he's no longer in the fake RCMP car and has shed his Mountie uniform. The officers miss him entirely.
Back up, back up.
Fortunately, no one else dies before the gunman encounters Hubley and his colleague, Constable Ben McLeod, who both fire through the car's windows.
Pump 6, Enfield Big Stop. Suspect is down in his vehicle, multiple shots away.
Within minutes, backup arrives and confirms the gunman is dead. Newly released information shows the perpetrator likely also shot himself in the head. But the medical examiner says his opinion is that the gunman did not cause his own death. It was the barrage of 23 bullets from the officers.
Really innumerable gunshot wounds of the chest and abdomen with really profound mechanical damage of just about every organ.
The National Police Union says there has been much criticism about what the Mounties did or did not do, and that Hubley and McLeod very likely saved many lives. Tomorrow, the officers will testify, telling the inquiry in their own words how they ended the murderous rampage 13 hours after it all began. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
Echoing comments from the U.S. president yesterday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau suggested Russian actions in Ukraine amount to genocide.
There are official processes around determinations of genocide, but I think it's absolutely right that more and more people be talking and using the word genocide in terms of what Russia is doing, what Vladimir Putin has done.
And even as investigators gather at evidence of potential crimes, the war threatens to produce more, with bodies pulled from apartments in Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv after another round of Russian shelling, and forces massing nearby for the next offensive in the east. As Chris Brown explains, this next phase of the war is likely to be even more dangerous, and Ukraine is bracing for it.
Russian TV says these are Ukrainian Marines in Mariupol surrendering, some 1,300, although there's nowhere near that many in this footage. And Ukraine says despite unrelenting Russian attacks, parts of the city remain under its control. Mariupol's mayor accused Russia of using mobile crematoriums to dispose of the bodies of civilians who died from shelling or starvation.
Ukraine needs weapon supplies. We need heavy artillery, armed vehicles, air defense systems, and combat aircraft.
Ukraine's president issued an unusual English plea, practically begging for more help. It appears the United States will offer it up to $800 million more in modern weapons. Ukraine, it may have stopped Russia from storming Kyiv, but a looming battle in eastern Ukraine will be over more open terrain, and it will be easier for Russia to supply its troops. We spoke to a top Ukrainian officer about how Ukraine can respond. We've received lots of lethal weapons, and we've implemented NATO standards when it comes to combat, said Colonel Alexander Matuzyenk. That means a more nimble approach, with platoon leaders empowered to make rapid decisions on the battlefield, as opposed to Russia's top-heavy command structure. In another sign of Western support, more European leaders visited Kyiv's suburbs, where Russia is accused of murdering civilians during its brief occupation.
I just cannot compare even with Nazis. I think this is worse than Nazis.
Russia also issued an ominous warning that Ukraine should stop attacking targets on its side of the border, or else Russia will fire missiles at what it calls decision-making centers, including in Kyiv. Chris Brown, CBC News, Kyiv.
Well, Russia says the flagship of its Black Sea fleet, the missile cruiser Moskva, has been evacuated after an ammunition explosion caused by a fire. Ukraine has a different story. Ukraine claims it hit the Moskva with anti-ship missiles. The Moskva, or Moscow, typically has more than 500 crew aboard. Whatever caused the explosion, this could be a severe blow to Russian naval operations in the war.
As Canada looks to sanction Russian oligarchs tied to Putin, we investigate Canadian laws that serve to conceal the wealth of the super rich. Coming up, a mystery involving a lavish mansion, the royal family, and a well-connected Russian billionaire. Plus,
will the interest rate hike today cause a decline in housing prices?
How am I going to pay back my personal line of credit?
We get answers to your most pressing money questions. But first,
a CBC investigation prompts change in the military.
This policy went as far as it could legally.
But some say it does not go far enough. We are back in 2.
CBC News, The National, named Canada's best national newscast at the Canadian Screen Awards.
Well, with COVID cases on the rise, Nova Scotia has extended its mask requirement for students until Victoria Day weekend, at which point the province says it'll re-evaluate. Also, Ottawa's public school board has brought back its own mask mandate. Students in kindergarten to grade 12 must comply with that. The city has had to close more classes since the end of March because of staff shortages. In the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control is extending its travel mask requirement until May 3rd. It was set to expire this coming Monday. The CDC says it's waiting to see what impact the BA2 subvariant of Omicron might have.
After a review prompted by a CBC News story, the Canadian Armed Forces is distancing itself from a controversial practice: character references written by military leaders that are sometimes used to positively impact a guilty soldier's sentencing. Ashley Burke explains.
It's absurd.
It's unbelievable.
Retired Army officers Annalise and Kevin Shamoon spoke out a year ago about the damage and betrayal a positive character reference caused them.
For me, reading these words, it's beyond unacceptable.
Positive character references on behalf of a soldier found guilty of sexually assaulting his wife Annalise Shamoon, written by a senior leader of Kevin Shamoon's own regiment and another senior leader in his chain of command, Major General Peter Daw. The judge considered those letters when giving the offender probation rather than jail time. Now, in response to CBC News coverage of their story, the military is issuing a new guidance to members that if they choose to write these letters, it's as an individual, not on behalf of the military, and should take into consideration if it will create a conflict of interest, how it will impact the victim, and the use of military letterhead is not allowed.
This policy went as far as it could legally. I think that it could have gone further in explaining the difference between moral justice and legal justice.
Some wanted the military to outright ban character references.
These letters are not victim-centric. They take the attention directly away from the victim and they focus on the perpetrator and try and create sort of a sense of the perpetrator being a good person.
That recently played into the high-profile court case of retired Chief of Defense Staff General Jonathan Vance. He pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. His lawyer submitted 7 positive character references from retired military members. The judge said the references were one factor he took into consideration when granting Vance a conditional discharge rather than a criminal conviction. But the military says legally it can't ban members from providing these references.
That would have been the subject of a constitutional challenge because it would have infringed on the person's right to fair trial.
The Defense Department says the military took an extensive approach to balance the need of victims, the rights of the accused, and the rule of law when making these new guidelines. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, we want to go back to one of our top stories. The Bank of Canada putting pressure on Canadians to tighten their belts.
I am always ready. I am ready.
Financial expert Bruce Sellery is here to help us navigate the change. Plus,
a moment out of the school day to get musical and stand up against discrimination. Stay with us. Well, welcome back. As you know, the Bank of Canada made a major move today to try to calm rising inflation and give Canadians some relief from soaring prices of food, gas, and other goods.
Yeah, it raised the benchmark interest rate by 0.5%. That is the biggest single hike in more than 20 years. And that has you asking a lot of questions about what this means for your personal finances. So we have brought in personal finance expert and Credit Canada CEO Bruce Sellery here to answer some of those questions. Bruce, are you ready to just dive right in?
Ready to go.
Charlotte has your first question.
Hi there, my name is Charlotte Schwartz in Toronto, and my question is, will the interest rate hike today cause a decline in housing prices in the market? And if so, and presupposing that people can now enter the market who may not have been able to do so before, how will that impact their ability to borrow when they make a purchase?
What do you think, Bruce?
I think house price growth will certainly flatten, and we may well see a decline in some markets. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you're a seller and this was your time to take profit on the home you've owned for decades, you might be a little sad about that. But as Canadians, I think there's a shared value around some semblance of housing affordability. So there may be a flattening in that growth and maybe a decline in some markets. Fingers crossed. In terms of affordability, it is tough. Rates will rise. If house prices pull back a little bit, it's still going to be very hard for a lot of Canadians at the incomes they're earning and the down payments they have saved to buy a home. That is a challenge that has been with us for 5 or 10 years. It's only gotten worse. And I think we can hope that if the growth in these prices flattens out a little bit, that the market will return to some semblance of balance.
Okay, so Bruce, as you can probably imagine, housing is a bit of a preoccupation for Canadians. We've had a lot of questions. A follow-up from Jeff Rankin, who asked, is the Canadian housing market currently in a bubble? And if the interest rates continue to rise over this year, will that bubble pop?
We don't know. No one knows. No one knows. Here's the thing that I would ask Jeff is, why does that matter to you? So if you bought a house 10 years ago and it has doubled in price over that time, if all of a sudden you're right, it is a bubble, it pops, and that house price drops by 30%, it will feel horrible, but you will still be way, way further ahead than when you bought that house a long period of time ago. If you have no intention of selling the house, whether it goes up or down is only a loss or a gain on paper. It doesn't matter. I'm going to stay in my house until they come and cart me out the front door in a box. So whether the price goes up or down doesn't really matter so much to me. It just feels worrying. It's upsetting to see, but doesn't actually affect me financially.
Okay, I hope it doesn't come to that, carting you out of your house in a box. Here's a question.
60 years from now, I'm ready.
Okay, here's a question from Kenneth.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Fung. I'm retired. I'm wondering, with the interest rate hike, when and how am I going to pay back my personal line of credit? Thank you.
Right, it's not just about houses, huh?
And for personal lines of credit, those rates are variable typically, right? And so that is an immediate increase. So for someone who's got a fixed rate mortgage, they may not feel that rate hike for a couple of years when they renew. If you've got a variable rate or a line of credit, you will see that and feel that immediately. His question is, how do I pay that off? Well, it is the same for everyone. And that is, you've got to look at cash flow and see where you can increase income or reduce expenses. For retirees, there's not a lot of retirees who are headed out there and getting another job. They've either made a choice or there is there's some reason why they're not drawing a paycheck like they were before they retired. So that comes down to expenses. And this is the mom and apple pie phrase that no one likes. You have to live within your means. And now we've got this reality that food costs more, gas costs more. If you've got a debt outstanding on a line of credit, that costs more too. And so like the law of gravity, you've got to live within your means and find ways to pull back on expenses such that you're not pushing the balance on that line of credit up even higher.
Well, and you have to imagine folks with, car loans, student loans would be facing a similar sort of situation. Adrienne, you've got another question from Mike.
Yeah, it's a pretty tight one, actually. Mike wants to know, what is a good, safe investment now? The thing is, Bruce, no one's asking you what company people should be investing in, but broadly, are there types of investments people could maybe feel more comfortable with in a high interest scenario?
Well, I love the paradox of that good, safe requirement, right? Because there is a trade-off between risk and reward. The higher the risk, the higher the potential reward. The lower the risk, the lower the potential reward. So as we look out to the future, the other big question to ask yourself is, what am I investing for? Am I investing for something 40 years out into the future, or is it 5 years out into the future? Because what you put your money in is relative to the time in which you need it. Back to basics here. If you're investing, let's say it's for retirement, you want to be diversified across different companies, different sectors, different geographies, and you want those investments to be at a low cost. So that's the mom and apple pie. I am not a fan of flavor of the month. It's a headline grabber. It's super fun. Maybe with 5% of your portfolio, you play with stuff and invest in the flavor of the month, the thing that's exciting. But for most of it, it really should be so boring. Diversified, low cost, boring, just like me.
All right, we have a million more questions. We are not going to ask them tonight. But Bruce Ellery, thank you for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
After the break, following Russian money concealed by Canadian laws. Investigating the mystery behind this luxury property in BC. Plus,
it's going to be chaos. Look at the width of the road.
A planned condo development, some say, is casting a shadow over a tribute to Canada's D-Day soldiers.
welcome back. Canada says it is targeting Russian elites with sanctions, but finding out who owns assets in this country isn't always easy. Tonight, an investigation into Canada's loose and murky laws that can serve to conceal the wealth of the ultra-rich. Frederic Zalac of Radio-Canada's Enquête, in partnership with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, unravels a mystery involving a lavish mansion on Vancouver Island, the royal family, and a well-connected Russian billionaire.
On Vancouver Island, just north of Victoria, there's a spectacular waterfront mansion that attracted a lot of attention a couple of years ago because a very famous couple was staying there. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle chose to live in this lavish $18 million mansion for a few months with baby Archie when they quit their royal duties.
I saw the car go by. I believe Meghan was in it.
Neighbors caught glimpses of the couple, but behind those closed gates remained a mystery. Who was the wealthy owner of the mansion? With Canada's notoriously weak landowner and corporate registries and lax transparency laws, the real owners are often impossible to track, making our country very attractive for those who wish to hide assets. According to rumors around town, the mystery owner was a Russian billionaire.
Everybody was talking about it and saying, oh, it's Yuri Milner, and so that's what we heard.
Yep.
And that rumor's never gone away.
We have one last announcement this evening.
Yuri Milner is a Russian billionaire who made it big in Silicon Valley. He became a large shareholder of Facebook and Twitter before the tech giants went public.
Please welcome one of the founders of the Breakthrough Prize, Yuri Milner.
Milner founded annual awards where he joined A-list Hollywood actors and pop stars to present prizes to worthy scientists.
In every cell of our bodies, the history of humanity is written in DNA.
He owns this $100 million French-style chateau in Silicon Valley. It's been reported that he also owns this 350-foot mega yacht, the Andromeda, but he has publicly denied it. Milner is not in the immediate circle of powerful oligarchs around Putin, but the New York Times and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists revealed a few years ago that he received millions from the Kremlin to invest in Twitter through VTB, a state-owned bank. Some of his funds invested in Facebook came from Gazprom, the state-owned Russian energy giant, and went through Alisher Usmanov, a powerful oligarch who's now sanctioned by Canada and other countries. Milner now says that he hasn't received Russian funds since 2011.
He's a Russian investor who is making investments in the U.S. with the funding of a very significant oligarch in Russia and a very significant, politically significant Russian state-owned bank.
Well, it's extremely close to the Kremlin. It's government-owned, and it's actually sanctioned at the moment because it's government-owned and because it's such a kind of, what would you call it, a slush fund for the government.
So, did Milner buy the Vancouver Island estate? When we first reached out to him, he stated that neither he nor any family member nor any entity affiliated with him or his family owns Millefleur Mansion on Vancouver Island, labeling claims of his ownership as inaccurate media assertions. Public documents provide no information about who bought this property, but we managed to track it down because of the Pandora Papers leak of confidential offshore documents. The mansion is controlled by a shell company registered in the British Virgin Islands, JEMC Management Limited, which is in turn owned by a Bahamian company, ultimately owned by an offshore trust, a trust now named Andromeda, but formerly known as the Yuri Milner Trust.
If it all goes back to a trust that's called the Yuri Milner Trust, that's a pretty big giveaway.
According to one of the leaked documents, Yuri Milner exercised control over a series of companies, including JEMC Management, the company linked to the mansion. We showed the documents to Pat Poitvin, a retired RCMP investigator and founder of the Canadian Centre of Excellence for Anti-Corruption.
If the data on those documents are real, it shows that Mr. Milner has ultimate control over this property, has created multiple layers of companies to hide the ultimate beneficiary owner of this property? And why do we need to structure and have a strategy of so many layers to hide this?
We went back to Milner with the findings of our investigation, and this time we got a different answer. Milner now admits that the Yuri Milner Trust, which was funded by him, did purchase the Vancouver Island mansion in 2013. However, he says he and his wife were later removed from the list of beneficiaries and replaced by unnamed charitable foundations. He claims that he's neither controlling nor benefiting from the trust, including the Canadian mansion. And what about the Andromeda mega yacht? In his response, Milner admits for the first time that a trust he established bought the yacht, but claims neither he nor his family are beneficiaries or affiliated with its assets.
Ownership doesn't really matter. If you have the exclusive use of something, you basically have all the benefits of owning it without having to be legally owning it. So yes, he may not be the owner, but he may very well be the ultimate beneficiary, which is basically the same thing for all this stuff.
With the war raging in Ukraine, the federal government has announced it is speeding up the process to set up a publicly accessible registry of beneficial owners of federally incorporated companies by the end of next year. But real estate and land titles registries are controlled by the provinces. The federal finance minister hopes provincial governments will join the effort for transparency.
I'm not sure who wants to get up and say, I'm in favor of opacity when it comes to ownership in Canada. This is an issue where I really hope and believe there's a real national consensus. We have to get it done.
Will Canada shed its reputation of being a haven for those who wish to stay in the shadows? Up to now, most governments have done little to really address this problem, but many now believe we are at a turning point to lift this veil of secrecy. Frédéric Zalac, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, Canadian veterans and their families are speaking out against planned condos right next to a museum honoring Canada's D-Day soldiers.
Building luxury seaside condos is an absolute insult.
The debate over development at a place of commemoration. Welcome back. Our next story is in Juno Beach, France, a place well known to Canadians as the landing site of this country's soldiers during D-Day 78 years ago. It was a pivotal moment in the liberation of Europe, in which thousands of brave Canadian soldiers played a leading role. But now it is embroiled in an entirely different sort of battle, a planned condo development right next to the museum there. Alison Northcott brings us the story from Courseulles-sur-Mer.
Steps from where Canadian soldiers fought and died on D-Day, the Juno Beach Centre pays tribute.
We tell the war story, the heroism and the people.
The site attracts thousands of visitors a year, but the centre, run by a non-profit organization, says all of that is at risk due to a planned condo development right next door.
It's going to be chaos. Look at the width of the road. It just cannot be shared.
The centre's director says construction alone would limit access to the centre after a court decision ruled the developer can use the centre's private road.
This is going to kill the Juno Beach Centre, and the tour operators will no longer come. The buses with the kids will no longer come. And in the end, it's the existence of the Juno Beach Centre which is at stake.
I ended up in the water and had to swim in.
Jim Parks is a Juno Beach veteran. He's not against development in the area, but says this project is just too close.
To Canadians, it represents what they did anywhere in World War II in any parts of the globe. So it's there should be a little more respect shown for it.
A group of Canadians is mobilizing to stop the project altogether.
My grandfather landed on Juno Beach in 1944. People like me that have a personal connection are asking ourselves, why there? It's an insult. Building luxury seaside condos is an absolute insult.
Canada's Veterans Affairs Minister toured the site along with a delegation of opposition MPs.
My next meeting will be to make sure that the French government is fully aware of how important this centre is to Canada and to France.
While some locals are against the project, others say the area needs more housing. The developer, Fonseam, did not respond to our request for comment. Supporters of the Juno Beach Centre say they hope the minister's visit is a step toward a solution. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Courseulles-sur-Mer, France. Baseball history was made last night.
To go out there and just be ready to step in for that moment, it was a no-brainer, and this is my job.
That is Alyssa Nacken. She took over as first base coach for the San Francisco Giants in the bottom of the third inning against the San Diego Padres. That was the first time a woman coached on the field in a Major League Baseball game.
So that is correct. You will be adding just $1. You bet for the win. I like it.
And Canada's Matea Roach has extended her Jeopardy winning streak to 7 days with a running tally of more than $168,000 US or 211,000 Canadian. She is one of the show's winningest Canadians. Roach has also qualified to play in the show's Tournament of Champions.
Okay, when we come back, a moment to stand against discrimination. Students take part in an international effort to combat homophobia next. Well, that's a group of young Toronto students singing Lady Gaga's Born This Way to mark the International Day of Pink, where people are encouraged to wear the color to show solidarity against bullying those in the LGBTQ community. Schools across the country participated, and the colorful and musical scene at One Toronto Public School is our moment.
Today is Pink Day, as you know. It's definitely an important day to stand up against homophobia and discrimination.
We need to talk about discrimination, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it, and they don't want anything to be said, but it's an important topic and it needs to be shared.
There's nothing wrong with boys who wear dresses.
I'm looking forward to listening to the music and playing, and I'm looking forward to hearing people talk and share their stories.
It's a really unifying day where we all stand together and wear the color pink to show our support. This is the first big event that our school is doing. I think it's really beautiful, and it's so amazing to see like that sea of pink. Everyone's wearing the color because they're standing against bullying. They're standing to say that we're here, no hate here.
Now, it would be easy to make this mistake, but the International Day of Pink is not to be confused with Pink Shirt Day,
Right.
which is, of course, a day in February that's sort of anti-bullying, but this is against homophobia and discrimination.
Exactly. And this was the first assembly at the school in some 2.5 years, we're told. So everyone was sort of like running for the assembly to be there. I think Lady Gaga might be impressed by that. That is the National for April 13th. Good night.
Good night.